Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by AXON Tire, helping dealers move more iron for the past 100 years. For more information, go to axontire.com. AXON Tire has a couple great gifts they want to give away to you. One is if you have some cold hands, Shawn's going to be coming to Kearney, Nebraska. So look out, all the people in Kearney, Nebraska. Your housing costs just rose because Shawn's going to grace you with his presence. So check that out. So property taxes, man, just got covered. Shawn's coming to town. So he's going to need a pair of these deerskin gloves that AXON's giving away because it's going to be a little chilly, about 30 or so, 35 degrees or so while he's here. So get those deerskin gloves. You want a pair of those, send an email to marketing@axontire.com and they'll get those over to you. Also, if you are the first 150 people to sign up for Moving Iron Summit, you get $50 off of your registration fee thanks to the great people over at AXON. So check that out. Valley Transportation and Holland Ag and Construction Equipment across the country for the past 33 years. Call Parker at 800-657-4910 for your trucking needs. At Valley Transportation, our goal is to help you reach yours. And no matter how you buy your ag equipment, whether it's from a dealer, an auction, or a private party, AgDirect can help you finance it. You can even apply online at agdirect.com. Learn more about your financing options at agdirect.com. Tractor Zoom has access to over $20 billion in heavy equipment sales data. Tractor Zoom's Iron Comps is the industry's trusted solution for transparent equipment values and auctionable pricing insights. This podcast is also brought to you by Anvil AppWorks. Their Dealer Connect CRMI app with integrated inventory management is an affordable Salesforce-based solution for your dealership. Create connected customer experience and transform how you work today. Shawn is with Hackett Financial out of Boca Raton, Florida. He's nice enough to come on and talk about what's happening in the marketplace. So Shawn, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, Casey. Really good.
Coming to the great beef state of Nebraska, are you?
Flying to Lincoln tomorrow afternoon. I'll be there.
That's rad, dude. This is gonna blow your mind. You've been to Nebraska before?
Yeah.
So most people in Nebraska think Kearney's like a hard stop, and then there's still another 2/3 of the state to go once you get past that. But there's another part of Nebraska out there that most people in Nebraska don't know exists. So it's exciting. So,
well, I drive from Lincoln to Kearney,
right on.
And it looks like there won't be any inclement weather. It can be as cold as it wants to be as long as there's no blizzards. I'm good to go. So
I think you should be solid there. I don't think there's any blizzards in the forecast, but hey, it is Nebraska. Anything can happen anytime. So just be ready.
Now I'm getting worried that they're not forecasting anything.
It could hail. It could have a blizzard. You could have Mach 1 winds, whatever. It's Nebraska. All kinds of things can happen here at any given time.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, man. So a lot of stuff happened as usual. One thing jumped out to me when I was going through the some headlines and stuff I was reading before we started going here was there'd been all this talk about soybean crush and what that looked like and how there's this big lag and everything else, and everyone was concerned about what that looked like and the effect that you'd see. And then lo and behold, there's a report coming out where they're expecting to see a pretty significant jump in the overall soybean crush. So I guess looking at that, Shawn, I guess what are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, the crush is going to be as strong as it needs to be to cover the demand for meal and oil. And bean oil prices have skyrocketed because of the big crop problems with palm oil in Indonesia. And so that is creating a very strong crush margin, which means fresh beans have come in and the crushers are going to crush. I mean, there's nothing going to stop them from doing it if the prices are good enough to be there. And with the oil price being where it is and the meal price, not exciting, but the oil price where it is, the combined crush margin is very good. So I don't see any issues at all with strong demand for bean crushers as long as bean oil is this high. So
right on. All right. So another one that I was reading, you'd talked about this before. So looking at the wheat crop as it got planted, and there was a lot of concern about the drought issues that we saw in planting into some dry areas and the concern of the overall wheat production as we started looking through the fall emergence season. And there's been quite a increase in the overall amount of emergence that we've seen in the overall quality of the wheat that we're starting to see. Most of that's coming out of Montana as a hard red winter wheat up there. Except they've also had some pretty timely timely rains as well. So you've talked about that we were gonna see some more of that El Nino style patterns start to emerge and a little more moisture coming into the area. And I think this is a good indicator of that.
Yeah, we've got some moisture in a lot of areas. You know, like I said, I mean, we're not going to break a 3-year drought in, you know,
A couple of weeks.
in a couple of weeks, but it's provided enough moisture that the worst case scenario going into dormancy is not going to happen. It's still bad, and the conditions overall are still not good, but it is helped. And you know, as long as we avoid a long, cold winter with winter kill, if we have good moisture coming out of dormancy, we should be able to rehabilitate the crop significantly, even the areas that aren't looking very good. And remember, we've had 2 poor crops back to back, so I'm still expecting, if we have the El Nino early start to the spring, good moisture, kind of spring conditions that would really allow for a lot of growth and a lot of rehabilitation to the current conditions for winter wheat. I still think we're going to have a pretty significant rebound in the crop, and that means, you know, for the first time in 2 to 3 years, we're going to get larger ending stocks here in the U.S., which you know, we've been needing to see in order to kind of put this shortage issue, at least kick the can down the road a little bit further, and give us a chance to have some more reserves going into the Gleisberg cycle and that 1 in 100 drought we've been talking about. So.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that just for a little bit here. So the Gleisberg cycle. So that was something I was thinking about the other day when we got off. We had a good conversation about what's happening in Brazil and the overwhelming amount of you know, information that's coming in that's just showing it's going to be a huge crop. Now, like you said, it's still early. A lot of things can happen. The Gleisberg cycle, you talked about that being in 2025, correct? 24, 25, something like that.
The cycle, the normal cycles as we see them. So just as a the Gleisberg cycle is really 89 years plus or minus 1. I mean, that's you know, that's the range. So the actual worst Palmer drought severity index that we saw in the 30s was actually 1934. Okay. So 1934, that would say that, you know, that the Gleisberg cycle could be anywhere from 2023 to 2025.
Okay.
And then the way you determine what year is that year is you have to align it with El Nino, La Nina, and how that cycle is aligning with the Gleisberg cycle. It's not always, does not always align exactly the same. That's why there's some variability. It can be anywhere, you know, could be a few years off one way or the other. The way the normal cycle should operate is that we're ending our 22-year, 2-year La Nina cycle that should lead to a temporary El Nino in 23. You cannot have a major drought in the U.S. with an El Nino. It just does not happen. So if this is an El Nino year, you're not going to have the Gleisberg cycle in 23. But this is also not the time in the cycle for a major long La Nina, El Nino. This is the time for a short, sweet El Nino. So if the cycles operate the way they normally do, we would have a short El Nino in 23 into early 24. The El Nino retracts, and then your Gleisberg cycle is 24, 25. One thing we did mention is that we had this Tonga eruption early this year.
Yeah.
That deposited water vapor in the stratosphere instead of sulfur dioxide. It's never happened before in anyone's memory over the last 1,000 years that we've had this happen. All past large VEI, volcanic explosivity index 6 or higher volcanic eruptions, which this one was a VEI 6, actually made to the mesosphere, were sulfur dioxide aerosols in the atmosphere. And we know exactly what that means. It's a cooling effect, and it actually promotes El Nino the follow within 12 months time. So, but this did not do that. This pumped water vapor, which is actually creates a warming effect, because whereas sulfur dioxide blocks the sun from coming in but allows heat to escape, water vapor does block the sun from coming in, but it traps the heat from escaping. So in net it causes a warming effect. If you look at what's the mechanism for why sulfur dioxide stratospheric volcanoes create an El Nino effect, it has to do with the temperature differential of the land versus the ocean. Land cools and warms quicker than the ocean does. So if you have a cooling effect, it tends to cause westerly winds, whereas the high, it alters the high pressure system of the Southern Oscillation Index and causes westerly winds, which produces the El Nino effect. Speculation from research that's been doing from a lot of people like NASA and other smart scientists that are putting papers out, they are speculating that because this is creating a short-term warming effect, if the land heats warmer more faster than the ocean, will get sort of a reverse effect, meaning it may elongate or delay the onset of El Nino. So instead of the normal cycle kicking in, Casey, that El Nino comes in 23, early 24, it may delay El Nino's arrival until 24. We don't know for sure. We've never had this. No one, even the smartest scientists out there who are way smarter about it than me, all we can do is speculate. Now, once we go through this, we'll know what a water vapor volcanic eruption aerosol in the stratosphere means. All we can do now is say, right now, we're going to follow what the cycle should normally be doing. And as long as that cycle is following normal parameters towards El Nino, we're sticking with the historical cycles, which says El Nino in 23, Gleisberg cycle 24, 25. If we start diverging, and we really feel the next 3 months are the key to watch, because there's a certain pathway we need to be on if the normal cycles are in place. And if we fall off the wagon on that and we diverge, and there's a lot of indicators that we look at, Casey, to help determine whether we're on message or not. And we discussed this in a podcast we put out a couple of weeks ago. But if we start diverging from normal behavior, then we're going to start to think that maybe this eruption is having an impact on the El Nino La Nina cycle. And if it does look like El Nino is going to be pushed out into 24, then 23 could be the Gleisberg cycle. That our official forecast still is 24, 25, because right now we're not seeing anything yet to suggest we're not still on message with the normal cycle. But we do want everyone to understand that this kind of an eruption is unprecedented. It was large, and it is going to have an impact to weather. It is having an impact to weather. Well, no one knows, I don't know, and neither do all these physicists and scientists know, is how quickly will this erupt, will a water vapor impact Earth's climate, or how quickly would it impact the El Nino La Nina cycle? The answer is we don't know, but I'm going to be watching to see if that effect is going to happen early enough to push off the normal cycle. So right now, 24, 25 is still our forecast. But if within 3 months we see a major divergence and it looks like El Nino is not going to come, remember, we don't need La Nina for a drought. We just can't have El Nino. If it's flat or like neutral conditions, the Dust Bowl, we had neutral conditions. The 2012 drought, the La Nina, El Nino was actually neutral. We just need neutral territory or La Nina. We just can't have El Nino. So answer a real long-winded answer to your questions. We're still expecting 24, 25, but there is a possibility that we might get the Gleisberg cycle in 23 because of this eruption that we just have to be aware of and look for the signposts as we move ahead. So
okay, so when you're looking at that and you see what Indian stocks we have now, and let's say we have a banger year here in 23 and everything goes crazy, 24, 25, we have an opportunity to erase all the gains that we made in stocks. And I mean, I guess now as you're looking out long term here, now I'm asking for your crystal ball here, but as you're looking out long term and you're looking at these ending stocks, we could have up to 3 years here where we have really stressed stocks, world stocks, based on what you just talked about.
Well, if you look at how bad the Dust Bowl peak was, so like 2012 was the last time we had a drought that it was very, very significant, very significant. Yeah. And it was, I mean, it was a high order significance. But if you look at the Palmer Drought Severity Index in 1934, Casey, it was like twice as bad.
Yeah.
Twice as bad. Now, I believe the corn yield in 2012 was 120 and it was supposed to be 160. I think something like that.
Yeah.
This would be worse. Meaning we would be further below trend than that.
Then what?
Well, no. I'm saying the differential. Like.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You gotta, well, if you look at the percentage below trend, so 160 minus 120 divided by 160, we were 25% below trend in 2012. Because the Gleisberg cycle is an order of magnitude worse, we would expect yields to be down more than 25% below trend line yields. So
outstanding.
180. What's the trend line? Probably 180, something like that. So 180, 25% or more below 180, that's what we're looking at. Because our yields have tended to keep growing, it's always referenced to where the trend line yield is. But if 2012 produced 25% below trend line, and that was absolutely not as bad as it can get during a Gleisberg cycle drought, we let's put it this way, we would at least expect that, but probably expect something worse than that. What would that mean?
Like 140-ish.
180 minus 180 times 0.25, we were looking at a yield of around 135 if we match what we did in 2012. A 135 yield, Casey, I'm not sure exactly what that means, other than it is really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, we're struggling to keep.
We're struggling now with 170. You know what I mean?
170s, and we're struggling to keep ending stocks from bare minimum pipeline. We're dodging around dodgeball, right? We're ducking. We're 135. Quite frankly, I just can't even. It's hard to imagine that kind of a shortfall, and what that might mean to price, and what that might mean to livestock. What that might mean to the food shortages that we've been dodging a bullet around here the last few years. My goal here is not to be a Debbie Downer or gloom and doomer, and but people have to understand what that would look like. It would be really, 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 really bad.
Yeah, it'd be
really bad.
Yeah,
the Dust Bowl was really, 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 really bad.
It was. Right? Yeah.
I mean, that means there's zero exports coming out of the U.S. of grains, period. None. Zero. We would completely stop exporting because we wouldn't have it. We would need it for ourselves. That's essentially the way I see it. It would mean we have zero. We will not be able to export to anybody in the world. What would that mean? You could go down the trickle down effect, and it doesn't mean everyone else is going to have those. Like I said, I want to emphasize this is a U.S. This particular cycle is U.S. based problem.
All right, that's my next question. And so, is it going to amplify something somewhere else where it's wicked dry here and it's crazy wet someplace else?
The Earth's climate is a self-correcting mechanism. If there's high pressure here, there's low pressure here. If there's too much moisture here, there's dry weather. It has a way of just correcting itself. So yeah, where we'd be like this here, there's other places they'd be looking for boats to try to get around, and other places will have very good weather. So I don't mean to paint this that everyone's going to have the worst crop in 100 years, but the U.S. is so important in so many crops that even if everyone else had record crops and we have that kind of a crop, it's really, 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 really bad. Really, really bad. So whether it happens in 23 or it gets in this eruption accelerates the cycle to being a little earlier than we would currently think, or whether it follows the normal cycle of La Nina, El Nino, and we have it more in 24, 25, it's only maximally a few years away at maximally. And so I think everyone who's a producer, everyone who's an end user, everyone in government in the world needs to be aware of this cycle, needs to be aware of what it might mean, and needs to act accordingly. When there is available supplies, for example, with Russia bustling with silos overflowing in wheat, I think if I was a government and I was a country that has to buy food all the time, I would be looking for every opportunity to stockpile and build up inventories, when I have a chance to do so. And if 23 is we have a good crop year, like I'm still expecting, and this eruption does not change the cycle, you're going to have one more year to do exactly that and then batten down the hatches. Right. If it turns out in 3 months' time that we're starting to get the signals, Casey, that this is not happening, we're not going to get the El Nino, this is going to be more of a neutral-ish year, and the Gleisberg cycle's on the table, and we're heading down that path, that everything changes dramatically to what everyone needs to be doing, because you're not going to have that big crop coming. You're not going to have that temporary windfall. and you're going to have to take some much more quick, severe corrective measures to handle what that looks like. So the next 3 months are really important, Casey. I mean, it's like crazy important. Whether we go down this proper path, or this eruption disrupts the cycle to where it's going to be earlier. And I don't, like I said, I'm not, right now so far, I want everyone to be clear. What I'm seeing so far is El Nino was supposed to peak in October, and certain things that we're looking for, like the Southern Oscillation Index, sea surface temperatures, Central Pacific, the Indian Ocean dipole weakening, they are actually starting to occur. Like, we're seeing the kind of initial signs, at least, that we would expect to see if the cycle is starting down the correct path. Now, it's early, and it doesn't mean those cycles can't revert or change, but so far the start says we're on track with the 24-25 cycle. But we're in like the early development days of these trends. We need to see these trends continue to play out in this manner for the next 3 months. If they do, then all is well, and our original forecast is on message. But no, if anyone is making a weather forecast and is not appropriately handicapping what this eruption might mean to weather being different from normal, they're not doing their job, in my opinion, because this was an event it was a 1 in 1,000 year event, quite frankly. It's a very unusual event. And so one needs to understand we may not see business as usual in climate over the next few years, and to be on guard. So
if this drought situation happens like you're talking about, then if you look at the the cattle herd, and that's just going to continue to see liquidation there, correct?
Well, what would happen is this brief period of the concept that we've done herd liquidating and then we're back to rebuilding, that would end in a hurry.
Right.
Pasture growth would be gone, feed prices would be gone, prices would be too high, no one could afford to keep the animals, and we would start liquidating again. As hard as that is to believe, we would start another liquidation cycle until some point the cattle price eventually rises to make even whatever the price is for corn at that time worthwhile. It'd be a very, very bad situation for livestock producers, extremely bad situation, because they're just coming out from underneath. They're finally going to get their chance to have a 12, 18, 24 months of good prices and at least feed that will work. And if they don't get that and they miss that equity rebuild cycle, it's just going to be extremely, extremely challenging for them. And it would mean that in order for them to survive, Casey, they really have to protect feed prices to the upside. Like they have to quickly get $7 corn bought, even though that doesn't sound like the right thing to do. If we're going down that path, even $7 corn would be a fantastic price compared to where we might be going if we have something like that. So I'm not here to, like I said, so far so good.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going with, and we pray every day that things are going to work out, that this is the good year for production. But I didn't create the volcano. It happened. We know it happened. We know what it did. We don't know exactly what it means, but we know that when you throw that much aerosols in the stratosphere of that magnitude, weather is going to change. The question is how much and when. Yeah. We don't know. We know exactly how much sulfur dioxide is required. We know exactly when sulfur dioxide impacts the weather. And we have multiple examples of what that looks like. This will be our first. Well, when this is over, now the next, if this ever were to happen again, Casey, we say, oh yeah, when we had the eruption Tonga, this is what happened. We would know. Right now, we're guessing. But at least we can be smart enough to know what signs to look for to say, is it impacting it right now? If it is, we know to look. We know what we're going to look. We know what that looks like. If it's not, we know what that looks like, and that's going to tell us whether the impact from the eruption is going to be more immediate, or it's going to be or the can's going to be kicked down the road a little further.
Awesome. This is good.
So the way I would see it is everyone needs to stay in tune to your show, because clearly we'll be talking about this in the months to come. So
I didn't know the Glassberg cycle was until you said it like a month or two ago. I'm like, what is that? Shawn in his made up terms. Then all of a sudden it's real. Look at this. It's actually a real thing. Look at that.
It is a very real thing.
Yeah.
There's people that know about it, that don't get on CNN, and don't aren't spokespeople for social media. It is a very known cycle in the scientific community. It's been repeating for a very long time, and it has arrived. And the question now is just pinpointing the correct time frame. And if it wasn't for the eruption, our job would be exceedingly easier. But because that has happened, it makes the forecast a little more challenging. So one has to accept what we can know, and one has to accept what we can't know. I can't know for sure when or how much the eruption will impact the El Nino La Nina cycle. I know it will have an impact, just like sulfur dioxide has an impact the El Nino La Nina cycle. And I'm smart enough to know what I don't know, but I'm smart enough to know what to look for to know what's actually happening. And I think that's the most important takeaway: is watch what's actually happening to determine whether that impact is going to be felt now or not. And either way, life goes on. We shall overcome. But either way, there is action that everyone can take in agriculture to mitigate to some extent the risks. And so the most important thing is not worrying about, I can't believe it's going to happen in 23. This is not fair. You still take the corrective action you can to make it less impactful to you.
Right. So, and then you throw a grand solar minimum on top of all that. Man, it's just a great.
It's a remarkable time for climate, Casey, because we are in a grand solar cycle. Not every Gleisberg cycle occurs in a grand solar cycle, by the way. 1930s was not a grand solar cycle. Right. In the mid 1980s, we were not in a grand solar cycle. The last time we were in a grand solar cycle with the Gleisberg cycle was 400 years ago. That occurred during the Maunder minimum. Oh, yeah. We had a Gleisberg cycle, and we had grand solar and a Gleisberg cycle coming together. So it just so happens that these long-term cycles are just aligning right now. And on top of it, we're moving into by 2025, we're going to be in a synchronous cold Pacific, cold Atlantic sea surface temperature cycle. The last time we saw that was in the late 1960s and 1970s, which creates very, very challenging, long, colder, shorter growing seasons, that sort of thing. And so all those three cycles haven't occurred in over 400 years, meaning 400 years ago is when all these cycles all lined up like this at the same time. So there you have it. I didn't make them up. They're there. They're natural. They're recurring. And it just so happens we happen to be alive in our productive years to witness an extraordinary period for natural climate variability. And it's exciting to watch it. At the same time, it's catastrophically scary.
Right. Well, that's good stuff, Shawn. I'm lucky to be alive right now. You got all this good stuff going on. It's great. All right, man. So you're gonna be in Kearney. You're gonna be giving a talk. You're gonna be hitting some of the stuff here we just talked about in your speech.
Yeah, I mean, every speech I'm doing now that I really started up with, I talk about this, the normal cycles, and I am throwing in this eruption now in greater detail because it is going to be these aerosols. The best guess that NASA and people way, way smarter about it than I am suggest that these aerosols will float around in the stratosphere, these water vapor aerosols, for up to 3 years before they dissipate to where their impact's going to start to be mitigated. So this is going to be, some kind of an impact. Remember now it was a February eruption,
right? So
we're almost 1 year in. Okay, so we were looking for another 2-year potential impact to climate in different ways. And so, we're just going to keep an eye on how this might impact and alter weather over the next few years. And then once those water vapor dissipates, then we can get back to, not having to worry about what aberrations they may occur. Now, and when we do get an eruption that's sulfur dioxide, we'll know exactly what it means. Unfortunately, this one threw us a curveball. So,
yep. Well, we're lucky that it went off underwater and not on the surface, because then we'd have a whole nother issue.
I would view the whole thing, agreed, if it happened above the surface or it happened closer to where a lot of people live, the humanitarian issue, the immediate humanitarian issue could have been absolutely catastrophic.
Yep.
The tsunami issue could have been catastrophically a catastrophic situation. Had it been sulfur dioxide, a volcano of that size, sulfur dioxide, it would have put us into the deep freeze, which would have been really, really, really bad too. So, this may or may not cause an issue in 23. The Glasberg cycle is occurring no matter what. I mean, so like, the eruption is causing the Glasberg cycle. The Glasberg cycle is coming whether we like it or not. It's just a question of whether it's 23 or not. And so if it turns out that we dodge a bullet and it's not 23, then this eruption really will not have done a whole lot of collateral damage to what would have already been the case. So that's really, we are very fortunate, Casey, very, very fortunate that it was an underwater volcano. It will be less fortunate if it does create the Glasberg cycle 1 year sooner, but the jury's still out on that.
Okay. All right, Shawn, good stuff as usual. Folks want to reach out to you, get more information about what it is you're doing at Hackett Financial. What's the best way to do that?
Our website is Hackett, Hackett, advisors.com. Lots of information on there about our weather cycles, capital flow cycles, more about how we do and what we do to make our price forecast to see if that kind of information would be of value to your listeners in agriculture.
Right on, man. Shawn, appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Great to be here, Casey. Thanks so much.
Safe travels to the great state of Nebraska. So
will do.
All right, buddy. I'm Casey Seymour, Moving Iron Podcast. Check me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast and the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel for the video version of this here very podcast. Check me out on MovingIronLLC.com for everything Moving Iron related. And check out the blog post, the library of the Moving Iron Podcast, as well as the information Moving Iron Summit coming up here in Nashville, Tennessee, September 11th through the 13th. If you want to get that $50 discount, send me an email at MovingIronPodcast at MovingIronPodcast.com, and I will get that over to you. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour, Shawn Hackett. Smooth Smart folks out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hardwood